Ambassador Zethkar had seen many things in his 400 cycles of life. As a senior diplomat of the Galactic Confederation, he had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations, negotiated peace between species that had warred for millennia, and stood in the presence of beings so ancient that they remembered when the first stars ignited. Yet nothing in his vast experience had prepared him for what he was about to witness on the contested world of Kepler 442b. The shuttle descended through the planet's thick atmosphere, its hull groaning under the stress of atmospheric entry. Through the reinforced viewport, Zethkar could see the scarred landscape below. What had once been a thriving agricultural world was now a battlefield, marked by crater-pocked fields and the twisted remains of orbital defense platforms that had crashed to the surface like fallen angels. First time seeing a human war zone, asked Captain Mordun, the grizzled Altarian pilot who had been assigned to escort the diplomatic mission. His four arms worked the controls with practiced ease, navigating through the debris field that surrounded the planet. Zethkar's primary eyes remained fixed on the devastation below, while his secondary eyes studied the tactical displays. I have observed conflicts before, Captain. The Zephyrian border wars, the siege of Antares Prime, even a legendary last stand of the Void Hunters. But this... He gestured toward the viewport with one of his three-fingered hands. This is different. The captain let out what might have been a laugh in his species. Different doesn't begin to cover it, Ambassador. The humans have been fighting the hegemony here for 8 standard months. Most species would have surrendered after the first orbital bombardment. The humans, they just dug deeper. As if summoned by their conversation, the communication array crackled to life. A voice, distinctly human in its tonal patterns, cut through the static. Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted airspace. State your purpose and authorization codes or prepare to be fired upon. Captain Mordun quickly transmitted their diplomatic credentials. There was a pause that stretched long enough to make Zethkar's gill slits flutter with anxiety. Finally, the human voice returned, notably less hostile, but still carrying an edge of suspicion. Diplomatic shuttle, you are cleared for landing at Forward Operating Base Defiance. Be advised, we are currently under sporadic artillery fire from hegemony positions. Follow the designated flight path exactly, and do not deviate for any reason. As they descended toward the human base, Zethkar began to understand why the Galactic Confederation had sent him here. The humans were relatively new to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 2 centuries ago. Most elder species regarded them as an interesting, but ultimately minor player in galactic politics. They were known for their adaptability, their strange pack-bonding behaviors, and their disturbing tendency to befriend species that others considered pests or vermin. But what was happening on Kepler 442b was changing that perception rapidly. The hegemony was not some minor territorial dispute or resource conflict. They were one of the galaxy's apex predators, a coalition of species that had dominated this arm of the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Their military doctrine was simple and effective, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, subjugated dozens of species, and their mere presence in a system was usually enough to force immediate surrender. Yet here they were, 8 months into what should have been a routine planetary acquisition, and they were not only being resisted, but actively losing ground to a species that most galactic powers considered barely above primitive. The landing was rougher than Zethkar had expected. As the shuttle touched down on a makeshift landing pad, he could see why. The ground itself seemed to shake periodically, and in the distance, pillars of smoke rose from various points around the base perimeter. The humans were indeed under fire, yet their landing operations continued with mechanical precision. The shuttle's ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, and Zethkar got his first direct look at human military operations. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare. The base was not built according to any recognized galactic military doctrine. Instead of the standard defensive positions that most species employed, The humans had created something that looked more like an underground city. Tunnels and trenches connected hardened bunkers, and every surface that wasn't actively being used for military operations had been turned into gardens or food production areas. But it was the humans themselves that truly caught his attention. They moved with a purposefulness that Zethkar had never seen before. Each individual seemed to understand not just their own role, but how it connected to the larger operation. A human carrying medical supplies would pause to help reinforce a sandbag wall. Engineers would stop their work to assist with loading ammunition. There was no rigid hierarchy visible, yet everything operated with clockwork efficiency. A human approached the shuttle. She was young by human standards, probably no more than 30 cycles old, but she carried herself with the confidence of a veteran commander. Her uniform was clean but showed signs of field repairs, and she wore the insignia of a major. "Ambassador Zethkar, I presume," she said, offering the human gesture of an extended hand. "I'm Major Sarah Chun, liaison officer for diplomatic personnel. Welcome to Kepler 442b. Zethkar accepted the handshake, noting the surprising firmness of her grip. "Major Chun, I must say, your base is not what I expected." A wry smile crossed her face. "I imagine not. Most species build for war. We build for winning." She gestured for him to follow her. "The colonel is waiting to brief you, but first, I thought you might want to see why we're here." They walked through the base, and Zethkar began to notice details that his initial observation had missed. The humans weren't just fighting a war, they were living through it. Children's drawings were posted on bulletin boards next to tactical maps. A group of off-duty soldiers was playing some sort of musical instruments in one of the recreational areas. In the medical bay, he saw wounded soldiers laughing with their caregivers. "I don't understand," Zethkar said finally. "This is a war zone, yet your people seem happy." Major Chin finished. "Content. Yeah, that confuses most species. Here's the thing about humans, Ambassador. We don't just fight wars to survive. We fight them to preserve our way of life. And the best way to do that is to keep living it, even in the middle of hell." They paused at an observation deck that overlooked the main battlefield. In the distance, Zethkar could see the towering spires of hegemony war machines. They were massive constructs, each one capable of leveling a city block with a single shot. Between the human base and those machines stretched a cratered wasteland that spoke of months of intensive fighting. "The hegemony has 17 battle groups in orbit," Major Chun continued, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "They have numerical superiority in every category you can measure. More ships, more troops, better technology, larger weapons. By every logical metric, we should have surrendered months ago." Zethkar studied the tactical situation. "Yet you continue to resist. Why?" The major was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed to age her years in seconds. "Because they made one critical error in their calculations, Ambassador. They assumed that because we were new to the galactic stage, we were weak. They assumed that because our technology isn't as advanced, we couldn't adapt. Most importantly, they assumed that because we're individuals, we couldn't work as a collective." As if summoned by her words, an alarm began to sound across the base. It wasn't the frantic wailing that most species use for emergency alerts. Instead, it was a steady, rhythmic tone that seemed almost musical. "Incoming artillery barrage," Major Chin said calmly. "You want to observe this." Instead of running for cover, the humans around them simply moved with practiced efficiency to predetermined positions. Blast shields deployed automatically, defensive weapon systems came online, and personnel who weren't directly involved in defense continued their activities with only minor adjustments for the incoming fire. The first shells began to fall. Zethkar instinctively wanted to seek cover, but Major Chin's steady presence kept him at the observation deck. The human defensive systems were impressive, intercepting most of the incoming fire with point defense lasers and kinetic barriers. But what struck him most was how the humans reacted to the few shells that made it through. When a shell struck near the medical facility, a damage control team, was on scene within seconds. They didn't just repair the damage. They improved the defenses while they worked. When another shell damaged a communication array, the backup systems came online so smoothly that there wasn't even a pause in operations. This is how humans fight, Major Chun explained as the barrage continued around them. We don't just respond to attacks. We learn from them. Every shell they fire teaches us something about their tactics, their capabilities, their limitations. And we adapt. The barrage ended as suddenly as it had begun. The all-clear signal sounded, and the base resumed its normal operations as if nothing had happened. But Zethkar noticed that several new defensive positions had been established during the attack, and the humans were already implementing improvements based on what they had just experienced. Impressive, he admitted, but surely this is simply good defensive doctrine? Major Chin's smile returned, but this time it carried an edge that made Zethkar's survival instincts twitch. Ambassador, that wasn't defense. That was reconnaissance. Before he could ask what she meant, a new sound filled the air. It was subtle at first, just a low humming that seemed to come from the base itself. But as it grew stronger, Zethkar realized it wasn't mechanical. It was voices, human voices, singing. The song had no words that he could understand, but the melody was unlike anything he had ever heard. It was both mournful and defiant, both ancient and utterly modern. As it spread through the base, other voices joined in, creating harmonies that seemed to resonate through the very ground. "What is this?" Zethkar asked. "That," Major Chin said, "is how we really fight. The hegemony thinks war is about logistics and firepower and technological superiority. They're not wrong, but they're not right either. War, for humans, is about will. And our will is not individual. It's collective. It's every voice in that song, every person who chooses to stand when they could run, every act of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds." The song reached its crescendo and then faded, leaving only the ambient sounds of the bass. But something had changed in the atmosphere. The humans moved with renewed purpose, their expressions more focused, their movements more determined. The hegemony bombardment wasn't random, Major Chin continued. They were testing our defenses for a specific reason. Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major ground assault within the next few days. They want to end this quickly, before word of our resistance spreads to other species in the region. Zethkar felt a chill run through his circulatory system. "And can you stop them?" The Major's expression grew distant as she looked out at the enemy positions. "Ambassador, let me tell you something about humans. We didn't become the dominant species on our home world because we were the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. We became dominant because we were the most persistent. When other species would give up, we kept going. When other species would accept defeat, we found another way." She turned to face him directly, and Zethkar saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before in any sentient being. It wasn't just determination or courage or even fanaticism. It was something deeper, something that spoke to the fundamental nature of what it meant to be human. The hegemony is about to learn why our species survived the ice ages, the plagues, the wars, and every other extinction event that our world threw at us. They're about to learn why we're the species that looked at the impossible distances between stars and decided to cross them anyway. They're about to learn what it really means to fight humanity. As they made their way toward the command center for Zethkar's official briefing, he found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about the human species. The Galactic Confederation had sent him here to observe and report on human military capabilities, to assess whether they could be useful allies or if they were simply another minor species that would eventually be absorbed or destroyed by larger powers. But what he was witnessing suggested something far more significant. The humans weren't just fighting the hegemony. They were doing something that no species had ever done before. They were winning. The command center was a marvel of organized chaos. Holographic displays showed tactical information from across the planet and surrounding space. Human officers coordinated with troops in the field, managed supply lines, and analyzed enemy movements with a level of multitasking that impressed even Zethkar's multi-lobe brain. Colonel Marcus Webb, the commanding officer of the human forces, was a man who looked like he had been carved from the planet's bedrock. His hair was gray, his face was lined with the weight of command, and his eyes held the kind of depth that came from making impossible decisions on a daily basis. "Ambassador Zethkar," he said, rising from his command station, "thank you for coming. I understand the Confederation wants to observe our operations here." "That is correct, Colonel. My government is interested in understanding how your species conducts warfare." The colonel gestured to a holographic display that showed the current tactical situation. "Then, you've come at an interesting time. The hegemony has been testing our defenses for months, probing for weaknesses. They think they've found them." Zethkar studied the display. The hegemony forces significantly outnumbered the humans, and their technological advantage was obvious. "Have they found weaknesses?" "Oh, absolutely. We have plenty of them." The colonel's tone was matter-of-fact, almost conversational. "We're outnumbered 50-1. Our weapons are inferior. Our ships are slower. Our armor is weaker. By any reasonable military analysis, we should have been defeated before this war even began. Then how are we still here?" The colonel smiled, and Zethkar saw the same expression that Major Chun had worn earlier. "Because the hegemony made one critical error, Ambassador. They assumed that warfare is about destroying your enemy. But that's not how humans fight. We don't fight to destroy our enemies. We fight to preserve what we value. And what we value most is choice." Before Zethkar could ask for clarification, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. These are different from the earlier alerts, more urgent and insistent. "Contact," one of the human technicians called out. "Multiple hegemony dropships incoming. Estimate battalion strength ground forces with heavy armor support." The colonel moved to his command station with fluid efficiency. "This is it, people. The main assault we've been preparing for. All defensive units to predetermined positions. Activate Protocol 7. Zethkar watched as the humans around him transformed. The casual, almost relaxed atmosphere of moments before was replaced by focused intensity. But there was no panic, no fear. Just professional competence applied with absolute concentration. "Protocol 7? Zethkar asked. Colonel Webb looked at him with an expression that might have been pity. "Ambassador, you're about to see why we're not just another minor species. You're about to see why even the hegemony should have thought twice before trying to conquer humanity." Outside, the first hegemony dropships were beginning their descent through the planet's atmosphere, their hulls glowing with the heat of entry. Each one carried enough firepower to level a city, enough troops to conquer a world. And there were dozens of them. The humans at Forward Operating Base Defiance looked up at the approaching invasion force and began to sing again. But this time the song was different. This time it was a war song. The first hegemony dropship touched down 3 kilometers from the human base, its massive bulk crushing the remnants of what had once been a civilian settlement. Ambassador Zethkar watched through the command center's tactical displays as the alien war machine disgorged its contents onto the scarred battlefield. What emerged defied his understanding of military doctrine. Hegemony shock troops were legendary throughout the galaxy. Each one stood 3 meters tall, encased in powered armor that could shrug off direct hits from plasma cannons. Their weapons were energy projectors capable of melting through starship hull plating. They moved with the coordinated precision of a hive mind, each warrior knowing exactly where every other member of their unit would be at any given moment. Behind the shock troops came the heavy armor, walking war machines that stood as tall as buildings, bristling with weapon systems that could level city blocks. The hegemony called them devastators, and their presence on a battlefield typically signaled the end of organized resistance. Colonel Webb stood at the center of the command center, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the tactical display. Around him, human officers coordinated defensive positions with calm efficiency. There was no panic, no desperate last-minute preparations, just the steady implementation of plans that had obviously been refined over months of warfare. Hegemony forces deploying in standard assault formation, reported Lieutenant Rodriguez from her sensor station. Shock troops advancing under cover of devastator fire support. Estimated time to first contact, 12 minutes. Acknowledged, the colonel replied. Signal all units. Execute protocol 7 on my mark. Zethkar found himself studying the human defenders through the base's security cameras. They had taken positions in the elaborate tunnel system that honeycombed the area around the base. Each position was carefully camouflaged, designed to be invisible until the moment it opened fire. But what struck him most was the expression on the human faces he could see. They weren't afraid. Some were focused, some were determined, a few even seemed excited. But none showed the fear that he would have expected from troops facing impossible odds. It was as if they knew something that the approaching hegemony forces did not. Colonel, Zethkar said, your troops seem remarkably calm considering what they're facing. Webb glanced at him with that same unsettling smile. Ambassador, you're thinking like every other species in the galaxy. You're looking at this situation and seeing a hopeless last stand. But that's not what this is. Before Zethkar could ask for clarification, the first exchange of fire erupted across the battlefield. Hegemony energy weapons lit up the darkening sky as their forces began their assault. The humans responded with kinetic weapons, projectile systems that seemed primitive compared to the alien energy projectors. But something was wrong with the hegemony advance. Their usual coordinated precision was being disrupted by something unexpected. Instead of meeting organized resistance at predictable defensive positions, they were encountering sporadic fire from locations that didn't appear on any tactical map. Sir, first phase is proceeding as planned, reported Major Chen's voice over the communication system. Enemy forces are committing to the primary assault corridor. Confirmed. Begin Phase 2. Zethkar watched in fascination as what had seemed like random defensive fire suddenly revealed its true nature. The humans weren't trying to stop the hegemony advance. They were guiding it. Each burst of weapons fire, each defensive position that fell back, was channeling the alien forces into a specific area of the battlefield. You're hurting them, Zethkar realized. Humans learned to hunt in packs millions of years ago, Colonel Webb replied. We learned to coordinate, to communicate, to work together to bring down prey much larger and more dangerous than any individual hunter. The principles haven't changed, just the scale. On the tactical display, the hegemony forces had advanced nearly 2 kilometers from their landing zones. They were making excellent progress, exactly as their battle doctrine demanded. Their shock troops had broken through 3 defensive lines. Their devastators were providing overwhelming fire support, and human casualties appeared to be mounting rapidly. But something else was happening that the hegemony commanders couldn't see. Human forces were moving through their tunnel system, emerging behind the advancing alien troops. Not to attack, not yet, but to observe, to gather intelligence, to prepare. Phase 2 complete. Came another report from the field. Enemy forces have committed their reserves. All units report ready for Phase 3. Execute, Colonel Webb ordered. What happened next redefined Zethkar's understanding of warfare. The attack didn't come from the human defensive positions that the hegemony had been fighting. It came from everywhere else. From concealed bunkers that had remained silent throughout the battle. From camouflage positions that had been constructed weeks ago and left unmanned until this moment. From the tunnel system itself, as human troops emerged directly beneath hegemony forces. But it wasn't the surprise that made the attack devastating. It was the coordination. Every human weapon fired at precisely the same moment. Not approximately the same moment. Not within a few seconds of each other. The exact same moment, as if the entire human force was a single organism with perfect internal communication. The result was catastrophic for the hegemony forces. Their shock troops, spread out across the battlefield in standard assault formation, suddenly found themselves under fire from directions they hadn't known existed. Their devastators, designed to provide fire support against fixed defensive positions, were being attacked by mobile human teams that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Ow! Zethkar breathed, watching the tactical display as hegemony units began to fall out of communication with their command structure. Quantum entanglement communicators, Colonel Webb explained, his attention still focused on the battle. Every human soldier on this planet carries one. Instantaneous communication across any distance, undetectable by conventional sensors, impossible to jam or intercept. But the cost is irrelevant when you're fighting for survival. Ambassador, let me explain something about human economics. When our existence is threatened, we stop thinking about profit margins and start thinking about victory margins. Every resource, every innovation, every advantage we can create gets deployed immediately. The hegemony forces were adapting, as Zethkar knew they would. They were professional soldiers with thousands of years of military tradition behind them. They began to consolidate their positions, calling for orbital support, attempting to re-establish their command structure. But the humans were adapting faster. Sir, hegemony forces are requesting orbital bombardment on our positions, reported Lieutenant Rodriguez. Let them, Colonel Webb replied. Signal all units. Execute Phase 4. Zethkar was beginning to understand that this wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. The humans weren't just fighting the hegemony forces. They were teaching them something. And the lesson was becoming increasingly clear. The orbital bombardment began exactly as the hegemony commanders had planned. Their warships, positioned in high orbit around the planet, opened fire with weapons that could crack continents. Energy beams capable of melting mountains struck the human positions with devastating accuracy. Except the positions they struck were empty. Phase 4 is mobility, Colonel Webb explained as they watched the bombardment destroy carefully prepared decoy positions. We're not a static defense. We never were. Every position, every bunker, every defensive line was designed to be abandoned at a moment's notice. On the tactical display, Zethkar could see the human forces flowing across the battlefield like liquid. They moved through their tunnel system, across prepared routes, through terrain that seemed impassable to other species. And wherever they moved, they left devastation in their wake. The hegemony troops found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to stay in one place long enough to be destroyed. Human teams would appear, strike with devastating precision, and disappear before return fire could be organized. The alien forces' superior technology and firepower meant nothing if they couldn't target their enemies. This is impossible, Zethkar said. No species fights like this. No other species needs to. Major Chen's voice came through the communication system. She was somewhere on the battlefield, leading one of the mobile assault teams. Most species in the galaxy achieve dominance through superior technology or natural advantages. Humans achieve dominance through cooperation and adaptability. We learned to work together because we had to. We learned to adapt because if we didn't, we died. The battle was entering its third hour, and the tactical situation had completely reversed. The hegemony forces, who had begun the assault with overwhelming numerical and technological superiority, were now surrounded, cut off from their supply lines, and unable to coordinate their defense. But it was what happened next that truly impressed Zethkar. Instead of pressing their advantage and destroying the trapped hegemony forces, the humans did something unprecedented. They stopped fighting and began talking. Attention hegemony forces. Colonel Webb's voice was broadcast across the battlefield on all communication frequencies. This is Colonel Marcus Webb, commanding officer of human forces on Kepler 442b. I'm calling for a temporary ceasefire to discuss terms. The response came quickly, the voice carrying the distinctive harmonic distortions of a hegemony commander. Human Webb, you have fought adequately, but you cannot defeat the full might of the hegemony. Surrender now, and your species will be permitted to serve in a productive capacity. Colonel Webb's response was calm, almost conversational. Commander, I appreciate the offer, but I think you may have misunderstood the situation. This wasn't a battle. This was a demonstration. Your forces on the ground are currently surrounded and cut off from resupply. Your orbital bombardment capabilities have been neutralized by our ground-to-space missile systems, which you haven't been able to locate because they're mobile. And in approximately 4 hours, the human fleet that has been hiding in the asteroid belt at the edge of this system will arrive to engage your orbital forces. There was silence on the communication channel. Zethkar found himself holding his breath, waiting for the hegemony response. "Impossible," the alien commander finally replied. "Our sensors detected no human fleet." "Of course not. Human stealth technology is based on different principles than what most species use. We don't try to make our ships invisible to sensors. We make them look like something else entirely. Right now, your tactical computers are tracking what they think are 17 large asteroids moving through the outer system. They're actually human dreadnoughts, and they've been in position for the past 6 weeks." Zethkar's gill slits fluttered rapidly as he processed this information. The humans hadn't just been defending this planet. They had been using it as bait for a much larger trap. The hegemony had committed significant forces to what they thought was a simple planetary conquest, only to find themselves facing a comprehensive strategic defeat. "What do you propose?" the hegemony commander asked, his tone notably less confident than before. "Unconditional withdrawal from human space," Colonel Webb replied immediately. "All hegemony forces, military and civilian, to vacate the 17 systems that humanity has claimed. In exchange, human forces will not pursue retreating hegemony units, and we will consider the matter resolved. And if we refuse..." Colonel Webb was quiet for a moment before responding, and when he did, his voice carried a weight that made Zethkar's survival instincts twitch. "Commander, your species has dominated this region of the galaxy for 10,000 years. You've conquered hundreds of worlds, subjugated dozens of species. You've built an empire based on the assumption that superior technology and overwhelming force are sufficient to defeat any enemy." Another pause. "Today, you learned that assumption was wrong. You learned that there are other ways to fight, other forms of strength, other kinds of power. The question you need to ask yourself is this: do you want to learn more?" The communication channel fell silent for nearly 10 minutes. During that time, Zethkar watched the tactical displays as human forces maintained their positions around the trapped hegemony troops. They didn't advance, didn't press their advantage, didn't attempt to inflict additional casualties. They simply waited. When the hegemony commander finally responded, his voice carried a tone that Zethkar had never heard from a member of that species before. It sounded almost like respect. "Human Web, we acknowledge your tactical superiority in this engagement. Hegemony forces will begin withdrawal from your claimed territories immediately. Acknowledged, Commander. Safe travels." As the communication channel closed, Colonel Webb turned to Zethkar with an expression that was part exhaustion and part satisfaction. "And that, Ambassador, is how humans fight a war. Not to destroy our enemies, but to teach them that fighting us is more costly than working with us." Zethkar was still processing what he had witnessed when Major Chen entered the command center. Her uniform was dirty and torn from the battle, but she moved with the same confident efficiency she had displayed earlier. "All hegemony ground forces have been evacuated to their transport ships," she reported. "Orbital forces are beginning withdrawal maneuvers. Intelligence estimates they'll be clear of the system within 6 hours." "Casualties?" Colonel Webb asked. "Minimal on our side. 3 wounded, no fatalities. Hegemony losses were significant, but not catastrophic. They'll remember this lesson for a long time." Zethkar found his voice finally. "You could have destroyed them completely. Why didn't you?" Both humans looked at him with expressions of mild surprise, as if the question itself was puzzling. "Ambassador," Major Chen said, "we're not monsters. We're not conquerors. We're just a species trying to survive and thrive in a galaxy that doesn't always welcome new arrivals. Destroying the hegemony forces wouldn't have accomplished anything except creating more enemies." "But they were your enemies," Zethkar protested. "They came to conquer your worlds, to subjugate your people. Colonel Webb nodded slowly. Yes, they did. But that was because they didn't understand us. Now they do. They've learned that fighting humanity is expensive, difficult, and ultimately unprofitable. They've also learned that we're not interested in conquest or domination. We just want to be left alone to live our lives. And if they come back, they won't, Major Chin said with certainty, because now they know the cost. And that cost is higher than any potential benefit they might gain from fighting us. As the human base began to return to normal operations around them, Zethkar realized that he had indeed witnessed something unprecedented. He had seen a species that fought not with hatred or greed or territorial ambition, but with intelligence, coordination, and an absolute commitment to survival. More importantly, he had seen why even the legendary hegemony had learned to fear humanity. It wasn't because humans were stronger or more advanced or more vicious than other species. It was because they were different in ways that made traditional military thinking obsolete. And that difference was about to change the balance of power in the galaxy. 3 days after the hegemony withdrawal, Ambassador Zethkar found himself in an unexpected position. Instead of returning to the Galactic Confederation with his preliminary report, he had been invited to accompany a human diplomatic mission to the neutral zone, where representatives from a dozen species were gathering for emergency sessions about what they were calling the human situation. The human ship that transported him was unlike anything in his experience. The vessel, designated as the diplomatic Courier Harmony's Edge, looked unremarkable from the outside. It was smaller than most galactic standard diplomatic vessels, built with clean lines and minimal external armament. But once aboard, Zethkar quickly realized that appearances were deceiving. Captain Lisa Park, a woman who appeared to be in her 30s by human standards, gave him a tour of the ship that challenged his understanding of space travel. The vessel's interior was designed not just for efficiency, but for comfort during long voyages. There were recreational areas, gardens that grew actual Earth plants, and communal spaces that seemed to encourage social interaction among the crew. Most species build their ships for specific purposes, Captain Park explained as they walked through what humans called the common room, where off-duty crew members were engaged in various activities. Military vessels for war, cargo ships for trade, exploration ships for research. We build our ships for living. Zethkar watched a group of human engineers playing some sort of strategy game while simultaneously monitoring ship systems through portable interfaces. In another corner, the ship's cultural attaché was learning what appeared to be a musical instrument while reviewing diplomatic briefings. The integration of work and personal life was seamless in a way that most species would find inefficient. But surely this reduces operational effectiveness? He asked. Just the opposite, Captain Park replied. Our crews perform better when they're not just surviving a journey, but living through it. Happy humans are more creative, more adaptable, more willing to go beyond minimum requirements when situations demand it. As if to demonstrate her point, one of the engineers looked up from his game to address a technical issue with the ship's navigation system. He resolved the problem in seconds, then returned to his game without missing a turn. The transition was so smooth that Zethkar almost missed it entirely. The ship itself was a technological marvel, though not in the way most species understood the term. Human technology seemed to focus not on raw power or efficiency, but on reliability and adaptability. Every system had multiple backups. Every component could be modified or repaired with basic tools, and the entire vessel could apparently be operated by a fraction of its normal crew if necessary. We learned early in our space exploration that things break, Captain Park explained when Zethkar commented on the redundant systems. Equipment fails, circumstances change, unexpected situations arise. The species that survive are the ones that can adapt to those changes. The journey to the neutral zone took 4 days, during which Zethkar had the opportunity to observe human behavior in a contained environment. What he saw continued to challenge his preconceptions about their species. The humans aboard the ship worked with the same coordinated efficiency he had witnessed on Kepler 442b, but It was their social dynamics that truly fascinated him. They seemed to form temporary alliances and partnerships based on immediate needs, dissolving and reforming these groups as situations changed. There was a hierarchy, but it was fluid, with individuals taking leadership roles based on expertise rather than rigid rank structure. On the second day of their journey, the ship encountered a distress signal from a Zephyrian merchant vessel that had suffered critical engine failure. Captain Park immediately ordered the ship to render assistance, despite the fact that it would delay their arrival at the diplomatic conference. Zethkar expected a routine rescue operation, but what he witnessed was something far more sophisticated. The human crew didn't just rescue the stranded aliens. They analyzed the cause of the engine failure, manufactured replacement parts using their ship's fabrication systems, and taught the Zephyrian crew how to prevent similar failures in the future. Why? Zethkar asked Captain Park as they watched the Zephyrian ship resume its journey. You could have simply transported their crew to the nearest starbase. Instead, you spent 12 hours repairing their vessel. Because fixing their problem benefits everyone, she replied simply. They get to continue their journey with their cargo intact. Other ships in this sector benefit from having reliable rescue assistance available. And we've established a positive relationship with the Zephyrian Merchant Guild, which could be useful for human trade relations in the future. It was Zethkar realized the same philosophy he had witnessed on the battlefield. Humans didn't just solve immediate problems. They created long-term benefits from short-term investments. The neutral zone station where the diplomatic conference was being held was a massive construct, built by the combined efforts of 17 different species over the course of 3 centuries. It served as neutral ground for negotiations between powers that might otherwise be unable to meet peacefully. As their ship docked, Zethkar could see vessels from across the galaxy in the station's hangar bays. The sleek, predatory lines of hegemony warships sat alongside the crystalline constructs of the ethereal collective and the organic curves of hive vessels. But what caught his attention were the other human ships in the docking area. There were dozens of them, representing not just the human military, but civilian organizations, trade guilds, research institutions, and cultural groups. It was as if humanity had sent not just diplomats, but a cross-section of their entire civilization. We believe in transparency, Captain Park explained when he commented on the diversity of the human delegation. When other species want to understand humanity, we think they should meet actual humans, not just our government representatives. The main conference chamber was a marvel of interspecies architecture, designed to accommodate the environmental needs of dozens of different life forms. Zethkar found himself seated in the observation gallery alongside other diplomatic witnesses, while the main floor hosted representatives from the galaxy's major powers. The session began with a formal statement from the hegemony delegation. Their representative, a towering figure encased in ceremonial armor, spoke with the measured tones of a species accustomed to command. Esteemed colleagues, we have called this session to address a potential threat to galactic stability. The species known as humans have demonstrated military capabilities that exceed their apparent technological level. Their recent actions in what they claim as their territorial space suggest a level of coordination and strategic thinking that bears careful examination. Murmurs of agreement came from several other delegations. Zethkar could see representatives from the Silicon Consortium, the Void Hunters, and other martial species nodding in acknowledgement. The human response came from Ambassador Elena Vasquez, an elderly woman whose appearance was deceptively gentle. When she stood to address the assembly, her voice carried across the chamber with surprising authority. Esteemed colleagues, we appreciate the hegemony's concerns, and we understand the confusion that our actions may have caused. Humanity is indeed a young species by galactic standards, and we're still learning the protocols of intergalactic diplomacy. However, we believe there may be some misunderstandings about our intentions that we would like to address. What followed was not the defensive justification that most species might have offered. Instead, Ambassador Vasquez presented what she called a cultural briefing on human civilization. Using holographic displays and audio recordings, she walked the assembled delegates through the history of humanity, from their origins on Earth through their expansion into space. But it wasn't a standard historical presentation. Instead, she focused on the patterns of human behavior that had shaped their development. She showed how humans had learned to cooperate with former enemies, how they had developed technologies not for conquest, but for survival, how they had consistently chosen adaptation over domination when faced with challenges. The hegemony representative is correct that humans have demonstrated unusual military capabilities, Ambassador Vasquez said. However, we would like to point out that these capabilities were developed not for aggression, but for defense. Every military innovation our species has created has been in response to threats to our survival. She paused, letting that statement sink in before continuing. We understand that our methods of warfare may seem unusual to species accustomed to traditional military doctrine. But what the hegemony encountered on Kepler 442b was not a new form of aggression. It was an old form of cooperation applied to new circumstances. A delegate from the Silicon Consortium, whose species communicated through electronic pulses, transmitted a question that was translated for the assembly. How do you explain the coordination of your forces? Our analysis suggests a level of real-time communication that should not be possible with your technology base. Ambassador Vasquez smiled, and Zethkar recognized the expression he had seen on other human faces. That's an excellent question, and it touches on a fundamental aspect of human development. We are a social species, but unlike many others in the galaxy, our social cohesion doesn't come from hive minds, genetic programming, or technological integration. It comes from choice. She gestured to the human delegation, which Zethkar now realized was silently demonstrating her point. Representatives from different human organizations were quietly coordinating their responses to the questions being asked, sharing information and resources without any apparent formal command structure. Every human chooses to cooperate with others. Every act of coordination is a conscious decision made by individuals who understand that their personal success depends on the success of their community. This creates a form of collective intelligence that is both extremely flexible and extremely resilient. The delegate from the Ethereal Collective, a species known for their advanced telepathic abilities, asked the next question. But such voluntary coordination would be inefficient compared to direct mental linking. How can you achieve tactical precision without instant mental communication? Because, Ambassador Vasquez replied, we've been practicing for 50,000 years. She activated a new holographic display, this one showing human settlements from across their history. Every human community, from the smallest family group to the largest nation-state, has been an exercise in voluntary cooperation. We've developed cultural technologies, social protocols, and communication methods that allow large groups of humans to work together effectively. The display showed examples. Human orchestras performing complex musical pieces without a conductor, construction crews building massive structures through coordinated effort, research teams solving scientific problems through collaborative investigation. What you saw on Kepler 442b wasn't a new military innovation. It was the application of fundamental human social skills to a military situation. We coordinate because we've been learning to coordinate since before we developed agriculture. A representative of the Void Hunters, a species known for their nomadic warrior culture, stood to address the assembly. These explanations are interesting, but they do not address the central concern. Humans have demonstrated the ability to defeat a hegemony battle group through unconventional tactics. What guarantee do we have that these tactics will not be used aggressively? Ambassador Vasquez's expression grew more serious. That's perhaps the most important question that could be asked, and we appreciate the opportunity to address it directly. She activated a final holographic display, this one showing the current human expansion into galactic space. Instead of the typical territorial maps that most species would present, the human display showed trade routes, diplomatic relationships, and cultural exchanges. Honored delegates, humanity has no interest in galactic conquest. We have no desire to subjugate other species or appropriate their territories. What we want is remarkably simple: the right to exist, to grow, and to interact with other species on terms of mutual respect. She paused, making eye contact with representatives from several different species. But we also want it understood that these rights are not negotiable. We will defend them, and we will defend them effectively. What the hegemony encountered was not an attack on their civilization. It was a demonstration that attacking ours carries costs that outweigh any potential benefits. The hegemony representative stood, his armor clanking in the chamber's silence. "And if other species find your methods threatening?" Ambassador Vesquez's smile returned, but now it carried the same edge that Zethkar had seen on the battlefield. "Then, we hope they will choose to address those concerns through dialogue rather than force. Because as recent events have demonstrated, we are very good at dialogue." The implication was clear, and Zethkar could see its impact on the assembled delegates. Humanity was offering a choice: engage with them peacefully and benefit from their cooperation, or engage with them militarily and discover why the hegemony had chosen withdrawal over continued conflict. The session continued for several more hours, with representatives from various species asking questions about human intentions, capabilities, and diplomatic goals. But Zethkar found himself paying less attention to the formal proceedings and more attention to what was happening around the edges of the conference. Human representatives were having quiet conversations with delegates from other species, not lobbying or negotiating, but simply talking, sharing information about human culture, asking questions about other civilizations, finding common ground, and mutual interests. It was the same pattern he had observed on their ship and on the battlefield. Humans building relationships, creating networks, establishing connections that would prove useful in the future. As the session drew to a close, Zethkar realized that he had witnessed something far more significant than a diplomatic conference. He had seen humanity's introduction to galactic politics, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had experienced before. Other species conquered through force, negotiated through power, or influenced through resources. Humans seemed to be doing something entirely different. They were integrating, not absorbing other cultures or imposing their own values, but finding ways to work with every species they encountered. And that approach was already beginning to change the galactic balance of power in ways that none of the assembled delegates fully understood yet. 6 months after the diplomatic conference in the neutral zone, Ambassador Zethkar found himself aboard a human research vessel in the Andromeda Passage, witnessing what humans called a joint scientific expedition. The vessel, named Curiosity's Dawn, was carrying a mixed crew of researchers from 17 different species, all working together to investigate gravitational anomalies in the sector. What had brought him here was a series of reports that had been filtering back to the Galactic Confederation about human activities throughout their region of space. These reports painted a picture that was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. Humans weren't conquering territories or building military outposts. Instead, they were doing something far more subtle and potentially far more effective. They were making themselves indispensable. Dr. Sarah Kim, the human expedition leader, was explaining the research mission to the mixed crew as their ship approached the anomaly site. She was a woman in her 40s, with the kind of intense focus that Zethkar had come to associate with human scientists, but also the easy social manner that seemed to characterize all humans he had met. The gravitational distortions in this region have been puzzling astrophysicists for decades, she was saying to the assembled team. Traditional analysis suggests the presence of exotic matter, but the distribution patterns don't match any known theoretical models. That's why we've brought together specialists from so many different fields of expertise. Zethkar looked around the briefing room at the assembled researchers. There were crystalline entities whose mathematical processing abilities were legendary, void hunters whose understanding of space-time manipulation exceeded most species, and ethereal collective members whose telepathic links allowed for unprecedented collaborative thinking. Each species represented centuries or millennia of scientific advancement. Yet somehow, the humans had become the coordinators of this expedition, not through superior technology or greater knowledge, but through what they called project management. Dr. Ventura, Dr. Kim said, addressing one of the crystalline entities, "Your calculations suggest that the anomalies might be artificial in origin. Could you explain your reasoning to the team?" As the crystalline being shared its mathematical analysis through harmonic resonance, Zethkar noticed something remarkable happening. The other species were not just listening. They were building on each other's ideas in real time. The humans had somehow created an environment where competitive species were actively collaborating. When Dr. Venthera finished its presentation, a void hunter named Essikator raised a clawed appendage. The mathematical models align with our understanding of reality distortion, but they suggest a level of technological sophistication that exceeds any known civilization. Which brings us to an interesting possibility, added Dr. Lirith, an ethereal collective representative whose words seem to whisper directly into everyone's minds. What if we're looking at the remnants of a civilization that achieved technological transcendence? The discussion that followed was unlike anything Zethkar had seen before in interspecies cooperation. Each researcher contributed their species' unique perspective, but instead of the usual academic competition and territorial protection of ideas, there was genuine collaborative synthesis. And at the center of it all were the humans, not dominating the discussion, but facilitating it. They asked the right questions, made connections between different viewpoints, and somehow kept the entire group focused on the common goal. How did they do it? Zethkar asked Dr. Marcus Webb, the human liaison officer who had been assigned to accompany him on this expedition. Webb was the younger brother of Colonel Webb from Kepler, 442b, and he carried the same easy confidence that seemed to characterize the entire family. "Do what?" Webb asked, though his smile suggested he knew exactly what Zethkar meant. "Create cooperation between species that have been rivals for millennia. The crystalline entities and void hunters have competed for resources for over 10,000 years. The ethereal collective considers most other species to be intellectually inferior. Yet here they are, working together as if they were all part of the same organization." Webb nodded thoughtfully as they watched the research team prepare for their investigation of the gravitational anomaly. "It's not really that mysterious, Ambassador. We just approach interspecies relations differently than most civilizations." "How so?" "Most species try to establish dominance or negotiate from positions of strength. They focus on what they can take from relationships. Humans focus on what we can give." Before Zethkar could ask for clarification, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Not emergency alerts, but notification signals indicating that their sensors had detected something significant. "Contact," called Lieutenant Shun from the sensor station. "Large artificial structure detected at coordinates 77 Mark IV. Configuration unknown, but the energy signatures are massive." Dr. Kim moved to the main display, her scientific excitement visible despite the potential danger. Put on the main screen. What appeared before them defied immediate classification. The structure was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, but its geometry was unlike anything in known galactic architecture. It seemed to fold in on itself in ways that hurt to look at directly, and it was emitting energy patterns that made their ship's sensors fluctuate wildly. "My gods," whispered Dr. Venthera, its crystalline form resonating with harmonics that conveyed awe. The mathematical principles involved in that construction. They're working with equations we haven't even discovered yet. Essikator, the void hunter, was analyzing the structure's relationship to local space-time. It's not just sitting in space. It's anchored to the fabric of reality itself. The gravitational anomalies we detected aren't side effects. They're part of the structure's operation. "But who built it?" asked Dr. Lirith. "The energy patterns suggest a civilization with technological capabilities that exceed anything in our records." Dr. Kim looked around at her team, and Zethkar could see her making the same kind of rapid assessment he had witnessed from humans in crisis situations. We need to investigate, but we also need to be extremely careful. This could be the discovery of a lifetime, or it could be a threat to every species in the galaxy. Both, Webb said quietly, and everyone turned to look at him. Ambassador Zethkar, you've been observing human behavior for months now. What would you say is our species' most distinctive characteristic? Zethkar considered the question. Your adaptability, your ability to work together, your focus on long-term benefits rather than short-term gains. All true, Webb replied. But there's something else, something that drives all of those behaviors. He gestured toward the alien structure on their screens. We're curious, sometimes to the point of self-destruction. Dr. Kim was already coordinating the investigation. We'll approach in stages. Full sensor sweeps at maximum range first. Then, closer examination if the readings suggest it's safe. Dr. Vinthera, I need your best mathematical analysis of the structure's stability. SEK Tor, map the space-time distortions around it. Dr. Lirith, see if you can detect any signs of consciousness or artificial intelligence. As the investigation began, Zethkar found himself watching the human crew members. Their excitement was palpable, but it was tempered by professional caution. They were eager to explore the unknown structure, but not at the expense of their team's safety. What struck him most was how they had automatically assumed leadership of the mission, not through formal authority, but through competence and coordination. The other species were following human direction because humans had proven themselves capable of managing complex, multi-species operations effectively. The investigation proceeded methodically over the next several hours. Each species contributed their unique capabilities to the analysis, building a picture of the alien structure that none of them could have developed independently. The crystalline entities determined that the structure was using mathematical principles that were theoretically possible, but practically impossible for any known technology. The Void Hunters mapped space-time distortions that suggested the structure was connected to multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The Ethereal Collective detected patterns of information flow that might indicate a vast artificial intelligence. But it was the human team that synthesized all of this information into a coherent theory. We're looking at a research station, Dr. Kim announced after hours of analysis. But not just any research station. This is a multidimensional laboratory designed to investigate the fundamental nature of reality itself. Built by whom? Asked Dr. Venthera. Unknown, but based on the degradation patterns in the structure's outer layers, it's been here for at least 1 million years. Possibly much longer. SEK Tor's mandibles clicked with what Zethkar had learned was the Void Hunter equivalent of surprise. 1 million years? No civilization lasts that long. No, Dr. Lirith agreed, her telepathic presence carrying overtones of wonder. But artificial intelligences might. The implications were staggering. They had discovered evidence of a civilization so advanced that it had transcended normal space-time limitations, possibly achieving a form of technological immortality. And the research station was still operational. The question, Dr. Kim said slowly, is whether we should attempt to make contact. The debate that followed revealed the different approaches that various species took to unknown situations. The crystalline entities wanted to study the structure from a safe distance until they fully understood its capabilities. The Void Hunters favored a direct approach, arguing that true understanding required direct interaction. The Ethereal Collective was concerned about the potential consciousness within the structure and the ethics of disturbing what might be a 1-million-year-old mind. But it was the humans who proposed a solution that satisfied everyone. We make contact, Dr. Kim said, but we do it carefully, respectfully, and with full transparency about our intentions. We approach as researchers seeking knowledge, not as conquerors or explorers claiming territory. And if the intelligence within that structure is hostile, asked SEK Tor, then we withdraw immediately, Webb replied. But Most intelligences that survive for 1 million years do so by being careful, not aggressive. Hostility is an inefficient survival strategy over cosmic timescales. The contact protocol they developed was itself a masterpiece of interspecies cooperation. Each species contributed elements based on their understanding of communication, consciousness, and artificial intelligence. The message they crafted was transmitted using multiple methods simultaneously: mathematical patterns from the crystalline entities, space-time fluctuations from the void hunters, telepathic projections from the ethereal collective, and simple radio transmissions from the humans. The response came within minutes. It wasn't words or images or mathematical formulas. It was knowledge transmitted directly into their minds with a gentleness that suggested vast experience with first contact protocols. The intelligence within the structure was indeed ancient, a collective consciousness that had been created by a species that had long since transcended physical existence. It had been waiting in the research station for hundreds of millennia, studying the universe, and occasionally making contact with younger civilizations. But what it told them about humanity was what truly shocked Zethkar. Your species, the ancient intelligence communicated, represents something we have been waiting to see for a very long time. Most civilizations that achieve interstellar travel follow predictable patterns. They conquer, or they isolate, or they transcend their physical existence entirely. But humans are doing something different. What do you mean? Dr. Kim asked. You are building bridges, not just between your own communities, but between entirely different forms of consciousness. You are creating a truly integrated galactic civilization, something that has never existed before in this galaxy's history. The ancient intelligence shared images and data about the galactic civilizations it had observed over the millennia. Empire after empire had risen and fallen, each following the same patterns of expansion, conflict, and eventual collapse. Even the most successful civilizations eventually stagnated, their growth limited by their inability to truly integrate with other forms of life. But your species, the intelligence continued, has a unique talent for what you call cooperation. You don't seek to dominate other species or absorb them into your civilization. Instead, you create networks of mutual benefit that strengthen all participants. Zethkar felt a chill of recognition as he understood what the ancient intelligence was describing. Over the past months, he had watched humanity spread throughout their region of space, not through conquest, but through integration. They had become essential partners to dozens of species, providing services and technologies that others needed while benefiting from the unique capabilities that each species offered. The humans, the intelligence said, are catalysts. They accelerate the development of other species while benefiting from that acceleration themselves. It is a form of symbiotic evolution that we theorized might be possible, but had never observed. And the implications? Asked Dr. Lirith. Fosht. If humanity continues on its current path, it could enable the first truly stable galactic civilization. A network of cooperating species that grows stronger through diversity rather than weaker through conflict. As the conversation continued, Zethkar realized that he was witnessing more than just a first contact with an ancient intelligence. He was seeing the moment when humanity's true role in galactic history was revealed. They weren't just another species competing for resources and territory. They were the species that could finally unite the galaxy's vast diversity of life forms into something greater than the sum of its parts. And that realization was about to change everything. 1 year after the discovery of the ancient research station, Ambassador Zethkar stood before the assembled leadership of the Galactic Confederation, preparing to deliver the most important report of his career. The main council chamber on Confederation Central was filled with representatives from over 200 species, each one eager to understand the implications of what humans called the integration protocol. In the months since contact with the million-year-old intelligence, the galaxy had begun to change in ways that no one had anticipated. The ancient being, which had chosen to be called the Curator, had shared selected knowledge with the joint research expedition. But More importantly, it had validated a theory that was reshaping galactic politics. Humans weren't just another species seeking their place in the cosmic order. They were evolutionary catalysts, capable of accelerating the development of other civilizations through cooperative integration. And the results of that integration were already becoming visible across dozens of star systems. Honored colleagues, Zethkar began, his voice carrying across the vast chamber through translation matrices that rendered his words in over 300 languages and communication methods. When I was first assigned to observe human military operations on Kepler 442b, the Confederation wanted to understand whether this new species represented a threat to galactic stability. He paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. Representatives from the hegemony sat alongside former enemies from the Silicon Consortium. Ethereal collective minds shared space with pragmatic Void Hunter warriors. And scattered throughout the assembly were humans, not as a single delegation, but as integrated members of dozens of different species diplomatic teams. What I discovered is that we were asking the wrong question. The issue is not whether humanity represents a threat to galactic stability. The issue is whether we can afford to miss the opportunity they represent for galactic evolution. On the main display, holographic images showed the current state of human space. What had been 17 contested star systems a year ago was now a thriving network of over 40 integrated colonies, each one a mixture of human settlements and alien communities working together on projects that benefited everyone involved. The Zephyrian Merchant Guild reports that trade efficiency in human space has increased by 400% since the implementation of human logistics protocols. Zethkar continued. The crystalline entities have made more mathematical discoveries in the past 6 months of collaboration with human researchers than in the previous century of independent work. Even the hegemony has begun to adopt human military doctrines, not for conquest, but for defensive coordination. A representative from the Ancient Minds Collective, a species so old that they remembered the formation of the first galactic government, transmitted a question through harmonic resonance. But what evidence do we have that this cooperation is sustainable? History suggests that all interspecies alliances eventually collapse due to competing interests. Zethkar activated a new display, this one showing detailed analysis of human social structures. The ancient minds raise an important concern, but human cooperation is based on different principles than traditional alliances. Instead of formal treaties that can be broken, humans create what they call mutual dependency networks. The display showed the flow of resources, information, and services between human colonies and their alien partners. But instead of the traditional hub and spoke patterns that most interstellar civilizations used, the human networks were interconnected webs where every participant was both a provider and a consumer of essential services. Humans don't create alliances, Zethkar explained. They create ecosystems. Each species becomes so integrated into the network that withdrawing would damage their own interests more than it would hurt anyone else. A Void Hunter delegate stood, his massive frame casting shadows across the chamber. This sounds suspiciously like subtle conquest. Are humans creating dependencies that will eventually allow them to control other species? That, said a familiar voice, is exactly what we hoped someone would ask. All attention turned to the human section of the gallery, where Ambassador Elena Vasquez rose to address the assembly. She was no longer alone. Beside her stood representatives from a dozen species that had integrated with human space. Honored delegates, we appreciate your concerns about human intentions, and we believe the best way to address them is through direct testimony from our partners. What followed was unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history. One by one, representatives from species that were working with humans stood to describe their experiences. The Zephyrian merchant spoke of trade opportunities that had enriched both species. A crystalline entity described mathematical collaborations that had expanded the understanding of both civilizations. Even a former hegemony commander testified about military exercises that had improved the defensive capabilities of all participants. But it was the testimony of Dr. Lyrith from the Ethereal Collective that truly captured the attention of the assembly. "Esteemed colleagues," she said, her telepathic voice carrying overtones of absolute sincerity, "I have shared consciousness with humans during our joint research projects. I have experienced their thought processes directly, and I can tell you with complete certainty that they have no hidden agenda for galactic domination." Her words created a stir throughout the chamber. The Ethereal Collective's telepathic abilities made them natural lie detectors. Their testimony on questions of intention was considered unassailable. "What humans have," Dr. Lyrith continued, "is something far more profound than a desire for control. They have genuine curiosity about other forms of consciousness, genuine appreciation for different ways of thinking, and genuine commitment to mutual benefit. They're not trying to make other species more like humans. They're trying to learn from what makes each species unique." The ancient minds transmitted another question. But surely there are limits to this cooperation? What happens when human interests conflict with those of their partners? Ambassador Vasquez activated a new display showing incident reports from human space over the past year. An excellent question, and one that we can answer with actual data. There have been 67 significant conflicts of interest between humans and partner species in the past 12 months. Here's how they were resolved. The display showed detailed case studies of disputes over resource allocation, territorial boundaries, and research priorities. In every case, the resolution had involved compromise and adaptation rather than domination by either party. In 34 cases, humans modified their plans to accommodate partner species needs. In 28 cases, partner species adjusted their requirements based on human suggestions. In 5 cases, entirely new solutions were developed that benefited everyone more than the original proposals. Zethkar found himself nodding as he reviewed the data. This was consistent with everything he had observed about human behavior. They approached conflicts as problems to be solved rather than competitions to be won. But it was the next display that truly demonstrated the revolutionary nature of human integration. Technological advancement rates in integrated systems, Ambassador Vasquez announced, compared to galactic averages. The numbers were staggering. Every species that had integrated with human space was advancing faster than they ever had independently. Not because humans were sharing superior technology, but because collaborative research was exponentially more effective than competitive development. The crystalline entities have solved mathematical theorems in months that would have taken them decades working alone. The Void Hunters have developed new spacefold technologies through collaboration with human engineers. Even our own research has advanced at unprecedented rates through contact with different forms of intelligence. A representative from the Silicon Consortium, whose species had historically been isolationist, transmitted a careful query. These results are impressive, but they raise another concern. If integration provides such significant advantages, are we not creating pressure for all species to join human networks? Could this lead to involuntary homogenization of galactic civilization? That, said another familiar voice, is perhaps the most important question we can address. The speaker was Dr. Sarah Kim, who had led the expedition that discovered the curator. She rose from the scientific observer section of the gallery, carrying a datapad that contained information from the ancient intelligence. With the permission of the assembly, I would like to share insights from the curator about the long-term implications of human integration protocols. The chamber fell silent as Dr. Kim activated her display. What appeared was a projection from the ancient research station, showing the curator's analysis of galactic civilization patterns over the past million years. The curator has observed the rise and fall of hundreds of galactic civilizations. Dr. Kim began. They all followed similar patterns: expansion, competition, conflict, and eventual collapse or stagnation. But the current situation is different. The display showed predictive models based on current trends in human space. Instead of the typical imperial expansion patterns, the projections showed something that had never existed before: a stable, diverse, continuously growing galactic civilization. The key difference, Dr. Kim continued, is that human integration doesn't create homogenization. It creates amplification. Each species becomes more effective at what they do naturally, while learning from what other species do differently. The projection showed the logical endpoint of this process, a galaxy where every species maintained its unique characteristics while participating in networks that magnified their individual strengths. Humans aren't trying to create a human galaxy, Dr. Kim said. We're trying to create a functional galaxy where every form of consciousness can thrive. The curator's analysis included one more element that sent murmurs of excitement through the assembly. The ancient intelligence believed that this type of integrated civilization could survive indefinitely, avoiding the cycles of rise and collapse that had characterized galactic history. More importantly, Dr. Kim added, the curator believes that this integrated model is scalable beyond our galaxy. It could be the foundation for eventual intergalactic civilization. For a moment, the chamber was completely silent as the assembled delegates absorbed the implications of what they had heard. They weren't just discussing trade agreements or military alliances. They were discussing the next stage of evolution for consciousness itself. Finally, the representative of the ancient minds spoke for all of them. What you're proposing would require fundamental changes in how every species in the galaxy approaches interstellar relations. Ambassador Vasquez nodded slowly. Yes, it would. But the alternative is continuing the cycles of conflict and stagnation that have limited galactic civilization for millions of years. The question before this assembly is simple. Are we ready to try something different? The debate that followed lasted for days. But by the end of the conference, something unprecedented had happened. For the first time in galactic history, the major powers had agreed to a fundamental change in how they related to each other. The integration protocol was adopted by a margin that surprised even its human architects, not just because the practical benefits were obvious, but because the curator's testimony had given them a glimpse of what the galaxy could become. As Zethkar prepared his final report to the Confederation leadership, he reflected on what he had witnessed over the past year. He had been sent to observe a war and determine if humans were a threat to galactic stability. Instead, he had watched the birth of a new kind of civilization. In his report, he wrote, "Humans are indeed a threat to galactic stability, but not in the way we anticipated. They are a threat to the stability of conflict, competition, and limitation that has characterized our civilization for millennia. They represent the possibility of something better, a galaxy where diversity creates strength rather than weakness, where cooperation accelerates growth rather than limiting it, and where every species can achieve its full potential. The question is not whether we can trust humans with power. The question is whether we can trust ourselves with the opportunity they offer us." As he submitted his report, Zethkar looked out at the stars and realized that he was witnessing the end of one age of galactic civilization and the beginning of another. The humans had shown them that there was more than one way for consciousness to evolve. Now it was up to everyone else to decide whether they were brave enough to take that next step. In the distance, human ships were already carrying integrated crews to explore new